Alrighty, so this is session 2, under the hood. In other words, what goes on in the brain, in your mind, before you actually get to the workplaces, or in some cases, while you're actually there. And then Jane very expertly will follow on from whatever I make up today next week. This is, of course, I am using my marketing peer group teaser that I am serializing a book, the name of which will be revealed to you in June when we've gone through the whole program. So today it's all about brain energy, decision making, prioritizing, and solving problems. Shameless plug though for my partner in crime, Jane. Obviously we're here today to talk about brain energy and decision making, and then Jane will pick up the gauntlet on Wednesday the 23rd at 8:30 in the morning, talk about prioritizing and decision making at work. So here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to throw a scenario at you, and then we're going to talk about the prefrontal cortex. Yes, if you put your hand over your sort of forehead there, right behind your hand is your prefrontal cortex. And boy, oh boy, is this an important thing to know about your brain. And then we're going to talk about 5 activities that really take a lot of brain energy, and then how to value and use the brain, and then how to prioritizing. Everything related to brain energy relates to number 5. And then we'll talk about some things that you can do, and then we'll go back to scenario A. But now scenario A will play out in a different way, and we'll call it scenario B. And then there'll be a summary, and hopefully there'll be some time for lots of discussion. And oh, that resonated with me, or Pete, I don't know what on earth you're talking about. We will see. So let's get into scenario A. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to a lady by the name of Rose. We're going to meet Rose a couple of times over the next few months, but Rose is an executive at a company that promotes and runs conferences. And today, Rose is very, very excited. It's 8 a.m. in the morning, and Rose has just been promoted. And as part of her promotion, she has a bigger budget to spend. And not only does she have a bigger budget, but she has a bigger team to manage. So she's super, super excited as she gets into the office at 8 o'clock, opens up her laptop and begins to start her workday following her new promotion. And then she looks at her emails and she notices, I've got 180 emails. Oh, that's interesting. I should have a look at them in a few minutes. And then she says, oh, I just looked at Microsoft Teams and it seems that there's 25 people actually trying to get hold of me on Microsoft Teams. Better think about that as well. And then she notices she's got 15 voicemails. That's interesting. I better listen to them at some point. And then she notices that in her calendar, quite a lot of the day is taken up with back-to-back meetings. And then she notices that she's got a couple of deadlines that absolutely have to be met this week for a couple of conferences that are very high profile. Now, I do have to ask you to bear with me at this point, because obviously this is not the real world, is it? Nobody could possibly relate to this. Who comes into 180 emails, 25 Teams messages, 15 voicemails, a full calendar, and lots of deadlines? Well, maybe some people do. Let's have a look at what happens in the next hour for our friend Rose. So she starts with that range of things that she has to address on the left-hand side. By 9 o'clock, she's tried to tackle some of her emails, but actually the tally has now risen to 240. She did respond to the first couple of MS Teams messages, but now more people are trying to get hold of her, and she's gone up to 32. She's listened to 3 voicemail messages, unfortunately hasn't had any more. The meetings are still in the calendar, and the deadlines for those 2 high-profile projects are still, or high-profile conferences, are still there to be addressed. Suddenly at 9 a.m, Rose doesn't feel so great about her new promotion anymore. In fact, she's feeling totally overwhelmed. Rose is not alone. It is true that in this day and age, with the volume of information, the speed of answers that are required, and everything that's required of us, the workplace has become a nightmare. And it's easy for me to say that because having done the research for this particular book and this particular topic, our brains, the prefrontal cortex, is not wired to be able to cope with the way that the current working world has evolved. It really isn't. So, you know, what's expected of us in the workplace, to be completely honest with you, is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You're asking the human brain, the prefrontal cortex, to do something it's physically not capable of doing. And the only hope in all of this is being able to consciously or mindfully, remember last month, think about what takes the most energy when it comes to this, and how can I make sure that those things that somehow are more important than others get my brain energy while I've got some, and then what things might be able to be put aside and tackled later when the brain energy is now depleted at the end of the day. The only way to refresh the energy in the brain, there's only two ways of doing it. One, sleep all night, because that's when the body regenerates, but you can't do that during the working day. Two, drink a load of pop and glucose, and that will give you a short-term burst of energy, as with caffeine, but it's no good for your teeth and your overall health. So really, we've got to figure out a different way of doing this to maintain our brain energy. So the brain has some surprising performance limitations. The next time you think about somebody in your team who's not performing well, or hasn't done something that you expected, or really the result wasn't the quality result that you would have done if it was up to you, just take a step back and pause and think to yourself for a second, did we create the environment and the conditions that were conducive to this poor limited brain, this prefrontal cortex, doing its thing? It's an interesting question, and one, if you lead a team, that you should always be cognizant of. So let's talk about the good old prefrontal cortex in a little bit more detail. Making decisions and solving problems relies heavily on this region of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. Now, I call this the upstairs brain. It's the brain that is the most recent evolution in the human brain as a whole, and it is the difference between us and most of the other animals that have brains. So this ability to make decisions and solve problems is all about this front part of the brain. And if this is not working, you will not be able to solve problems and make decisions. That's just an accepted biological fact. So as I said, it was the last major brain region to develop during human evolution, but it only accounts for 4% to 5% of the brain. So there are other elements, as you may know, when we launched this program in September, that deal with emotions and other aspects of the brain and the body. But this one is 4 to 5% of the brain, but its impact is huge, absolutely huge. The prefrontal cortex is therefore the biological seat of your conscious reactions with the world. And that's the key word, conscious reactions. If you're not consciously thinking about it, it isn't in the prefrontal cortex. Your ability to think things through is when you're consciously aware of it, which means it's moved into the prefrontal cortex and you can actually choose to do something about it. That's why the prefrontal cortex is so important. So it holds the contents of your mind at any one point. So all the information that you hold in your attention. So remember mindfulness last month? When you hold things in your attention, you're being mindful. The prefrontal cortex is the way, or the part of the brain that allows you to be mindful, whether you are in default or narrative mode, remember that? Or whether you're in direct experience mode, which are the two different maps that you can have at any one time. But this prefrontal cortex is the one thing that determines what you can focus in on any one time. So whether it's external information coming from the outside in, or internal information like thoughts, memories, imaginings, images, or a combination of the two, it's the prefrontal cortex that decides. Without your prefrontal cortex, you would not be able to plan or set any type of goal. So for anybody in the workplace, if you didn't have a prefrontal cortex, none of us would be able to do our jobs. That's an absolute given. But it is an interesting insight that this prefrontal cortex, only 4 to 5% of the brain, can either determine your success or failure at work. So what I'm going to talk about very quickly is Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Kelly, do you remember the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears?
Yes, I do.
Give us the Coles Notes summary. What happens in Goldilocks and the Three Bears?
She goes into the bear's house. She wants to have a nap. She sees the 3 beds. One is too soft, one is too hard, and one is just right. But then the bears come home. Okay.
And looking at the image on the left-hand side, I'll just talk. She also sits in the big chair.
Sorry, she eats the porridge, and yeah, sorry.
Yeah. The big bowl of porridge is too hot. The middle bowl of porridge is too cold, but the last bowl of porridge is just right. The reason that I asked you to do that was because the prefrontal cortex is like the Goldilocks of the brain. In other words, everything has to be just right or it won't function well. It can be understimulated, it can be overstimulated, too big, too small, too hot, too cold. But if it isn't just right, this will explain why productivity in the workplace goes right out of the window. That ability to plan, to problem solve, to make decisions, to prioritize is gone. But how do you know that your brain is in the perfect place? The prefrontal cortex is available and ready to be the Goldilocks that enables you to do the things as effectively as you can. So when it doesn't function well, we can't make decisions, we can't prioritize, we can't plan, and then feelings of stress and overwhelm start to build in the workplace. And that is where Rose found herself at 9 a.m. on her first day following her promotion. So getting everything just right for the prefrontal cortex is what Rose needs to learn to do in order to get on top of the extra information she's now juggling with in her new job. Now, just a word of warning, I don't expect you all to go away from this peer group today and wander around your various offices going, is your prefrontal cortex working? I don't know whether my prefrontal cortex is working today. Obviously, but just being aware of it and knowing that all of us, every single one of us, go through the same thing. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter whether you're old, young, it doesn't matter whether you're British, Canadian, male, female, we all go through it. And it's this ability to be mindful of the prefrontal cortex because of the impact it has on us at work that will enable you and your teams to be more efficient. Here are the 5 activities that make up the majority of conscious thought. Remember, if it's conscious, it's in the prefrontal cortex. And these can combine to plan, problem solve, and communicate, but they use the prefrontal cortex intensively and using a lot of brain energy to operate. And this is like your Energizer Bunny batteries. As soon as you start doing these 5 activities or a combination of these 5 activities, you are depleting the energy of the brain. And like I said, there's only 2 ways to re-energize, which is sleep for 8 or 9 hours, or to drink lots of pop with all the glucose, etc., which is not good for you. So understanding the work that the prefrontal cortex has to do to understand a new idea is going to deplete energy. Making a decision, yes, no, black or white, what should it be, forward, backwards, that takes the energy away from the brain. Bringing back a memory, which means taking something that's not in the prefrontal cortex and bringing it into the prefrontal cortex, takes a lot of energy. Memorizing something, and we're going to do a little test on this a bit later on, retaining information takes brain energy. And then the last one is probably one of the most important of all. Inhibiting, not getting distracted, also takes a lot of energy, which means retaining your focus Inhibiting just means retaining your focus, but you know how hard it is to concentrate for long periods of time. And when we tried to be mindful in the last peer group, how many of us our thoughts started to wander instead of thinking about sitting on that chair if you were at the session last month? So in Rose's case, what is she actually doing? Well, she's trying to read emails, but she's doing it in a very ad hoc manner. It's a little bit chaotic. It's a little bit scattergun in her approach. That is depleting the energy in her brain. She's trying to respond to emails, and in so she's making decisions, which is depleting the energy in her brain. She's also trying to recall, bringing back a memory from previous training about time management. How can I manage all this stuff? Oh, I remember I went on a course. What did they tell me on the course? Oh, I didn't write it down. I'd have to try and remember. All of this is taking energy out of her prefrontal cortex. And then she says, oh, I have an idea. Oh, but what was it? I had it 10 minutes ago, and then I got distracted because I tried to answer another email. Now I've forgotten what the idea was. More energy's gone from the brain. She hasn't even retained the idea. And then as she was actually thinking about the training course and getting distracted, she actually accidentally deleted one of her emails. So the inhibiting wasn't working because she wasn't retaining her focus. So you can see in the chaos and the overwhelm that she is now facing, which I would suggest that one or two of us face as well, she's having to cope with the fact that her brain is now going zzz. And that's just a fact of life because she's trying to deal with everything as it happens live in real time. Does this sound like anybody? Maybe. Rose knows that one of those meetings in her calendar today are actually to go and meet Emma. And Emma is a colleague who will support Rose in her new position as an executive following her promotion. Now, as she walks towards the meeting place, a number of different things are going to happen before she even engages in conversation with Emma that will also deplete what's an already depleted source of energy in the prefrontal cortex. Here are 3 examples. Visual auditory. She enters the room where she's going to meet Emma, and she sees that there are a lot of people. There is a lot of activity going on. There is noise from conversations. There is other people entering the room, other people leaving the room. She looks around the room. There are pictures on the wall. She's trying to spot Emma. She's taking in as much information into the brain that would blow up a supercomputer, because that's how the brain works. It's taking all these bits into the prefrontal cortex as much as it possibly can, and it can't retain it all. So 5 seconds later, all the information that's been absorbed consciously and subconsciously is almost lost. That's just entering the room. Then she's got to conjure up the image of Emma. Has she met Emma before? Does she know what she looks like? Well, hopefully, yes. But what about all the data that she's stored consciously and subconsciously relating to Emma? Who is Emma? What role does she do? What can she do going forwards? How are we going to work together? All of these things are going through Rose's mind as she entered the room. And finally, why the heck are we here? Oh, yeah, I remember. We said we were going to have coffee together so that I could get to know her a little bit better. But on top of the 5 activities on the previous slide, and these 3, brain energy is again depleted. These 3 processes are very, very hungry. You can think of them like hungry wolves. Every time you have to enter a room and take in the visual information in the room and all the sights and sounds and conversations and people, you are depleting your brain energy. When it comes to the image of the person that you're looking for, there she is over there, you are actually, through focusing, depleting brain energy. And then trying to remember why the heck we're here in the first place, which might be done sooner or later, depending on how organized you are, will also take brain energy. So how do you value and use the brain? Well, the first thing is to recognize that you only have a limited supply of brain energy. This prefrontal cortex is absolutely a very important person. If this were a client, you would be treating it like God. If this were an internal colleague, you would be treating it like God, because it's so important to how you function at work and how you interact with your colleagues and your teammates and your direct reports. So let's treat it as a VIP. But you do have to accept that the brain energy is a limited resource and it's going to burn during the day, and there's not too much you can do about that. But what you do during the day will affect how quickly you lose your brain energy. So try and think of it a bit like the gauge in the car. You're going to start full and you're going to deplete, but how fast you deplete your fuel or your energy will depend on how you organize and the order in which you do things. So save your limited resource by prioritizing. It's the most valuable lesson probably to take away from today's little chat. So if I were to say to you, can you remember what you had for lunch yesterday? You probably could sit back and think, yeah, I remember what I had for lunch yesterday. If I were to say to you, can you remember what you had for lunch 10 days ago? That's going to take a lot more effort because you're drawing on something that isn't in the short-term memory. And, you know, maybe 10 days isn't all that long ago, but unless you went to a special function on the 5th of November, it's going to be very hard to instantly remember, yeah, that's what I had for lunch. So think of it like this. If it's in the very short term, it's not going to take too much energy. If it's something that's drawing on memory to bring into the prefrontal cortex from 10 days ago, even only 10 days ago, you are burning more energy. It's just an established biological fact. And it gets even worse when we think about problems and solutions. Problems are things that we have seen. They take low energy. You recognize that's not working. So-and-so's late. That's not completed on time. We've missed the deadline. They're easy things to see. But as soon as you have to start thinking about solutions and projecting into the future, how are we going to fix this? So things that we haven't seen, that's going to take a lot more energy, a lot more energy than simply recognizing that the problem exists in the first place. So prioritizing involves imagining and then moving concepts around for which you have no direct experience necessarily. And the brain hates that. That's what the prefrontal cortex does not like, because it represents uncertainty and it takes energy to fix. So do it. And remember, we're talking about prioritizing. Do your prioritizing when you are fresh and energized. And for most people, that will be first thing in the morning. Here's some things that you can do. So prioritize first, and then after prioritizing, putting information into words takes more energy than visualizing it. This is why, if you remember from the design thinking peer group last year, if you participated in those, when we got to the prototyping stage of design thinking, we always said, make it visual, don't write it down. So we had storyboards, we had sketches on the back of napkins, we had role plays, we had flow charts and process maps, anything that avoided words and was pictorial and visual, because if you can put it into that format, it takes less energy to visualize what you need to do when that comes to problem solving or a proposition that's being put forward. So remember, don't use words if you can create an image or a role play or a storyboard that will explain what's going on, because it takes less energy. And then the other trick is to write things down instead of trying to keep them in your head. I had to laugh this morning because I was actually in a meeting and one of our younger techs actually said to me, we were doing some brainstorming, and I actually said, do you have a pen and paper? You know, you can, if we're going to brainstorm, we need to write things down. And of course I got absolutely scoffed at because of, I don't use a pen and paper. Who does that? I'll type into this, that, or the other, you know, I'll do it that way. But sometimes whether you type it or whether you write it down with a pen and paper, the old school way in a notepad, don't matter. Because if you get the things out of your head, you're asking your prefrontal cortex to do less work. If you ask your prefrontal cortex to do less work, then you're going to be able to conserve energy, and it will make you more efficient for the remainder of the day. So write things down instead of trying to keep them in your head. I mean, it sounds so simple and commonsensical because people will say, well, that's not a to-do list. Yes, but you've still got to prioritize. We can all have to-do lists, but it might contain 10 things. What order are you actually going to do them in? And we'll cover that as well in the next 2 sessions after this one. So here is a quick exercise for you. You cannot write this down. I am actually going to rely on your memory, and I'm going to give you 10 seconds, starting from 3 seconds time, to memorize these numbers. What were the numbers? Who can tell me what the numbers were?
3, 6, 5, 9, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Actually, that's pretty good, Ryan.
8362.
8362
for the last 4.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And
Why
the middle
would-
3 were 932, I think. Ryan's
No,
at
no, no.
923? Was it
923.
923? Okay.
Let's have a look. 365 923 8362. Yeah. Was that difficult? Why was it difficult?
There's no sequence.
Random numbers,
Random numbers.
short amount of time.
They're
Okay.
they're
not
not
like-
broken up.
I'm going to give you 10 seconds to memorize another 10 numbers now. Let's see how you get on with these. Okay. What were the numbers?
I have a
32,
screenshot.
38,
38,
11.
56.
5649.
49.
Was that easier than the first set of numbers?
A little bit.
Why was it easier?
Because they were grouped.
Spacing.
Well,
I could
you know,
associate with my birthday with other things.
well, I think you also put us to task, Pete. You told us there's more importance on the second round than there was on the first. There was no meaning for this first set of numbers, where now you've
Well-
asked to do more. Or
All of those are valid, but the actual answer I was looking for was when you break the 10 digits down into 5 pairs, your prefrontal cortex will look at that and go 72, 38, 11, 56, 49. Now, it might not help you to memorize all of them, but you've just helped your prefrontal cortex in that task, because seeing it like that is actually easier than having 10 straight numbers all jumbled together.
Pete, I did say that. I said if you break it down into small chunks, it
Yeah.
makes it easier. I find the same as like the other one I looked at it kind of like a phone number.
Yeah, me too.
I don't like phone numbers when people give it to you with the numbers straight, but I like when they go, 416, 931, like that. They break it down. To me, it's easier to visualize.
Mm-hmm.
But
Do you
one
remember
chunk.
do you recognize what you've just said? It's easy to visualize. Remember what I said?
Yeah.
So,
Well, and this is the same thing. I could visualize if I close my eyes, I could see the 72, 38, 11. Like I could see that.
Yep.
Easier.
Yeah. Yeah. You may now go away and spend the rest of your afternoon knowing, Kelly, that you have been the victim of an experiment and you proved my point.
Oh, good.
All righty. So break information into small chunks. If you think about it, any project that you get given, big or small, what does a project manager do? Instantly breaks it down into the tasks. And that's just the common sense. But in so doing, into breaking a big project down into the little chunks, that is enabling the prefrontal cortex to do its job. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? But I think as I read the book to go through the chapters to prepare for these peer groups, I have aha moments all the time. It's not like I'm sitting here today going, I know all this stuff, I knew it anyway. Not at all. And it's simple little things like this, and if you can take it into the workplace, really makes a difference. So now we're going to revisit poor old Rose, except for this time things are going to be a little bit different. So there she is. She's been promoted. She's all excited. She's got a bigger budget. She's got a bigger team. It's 8 a.m. in the morning. And she's got 180 emails, 25 Teams messages, 15 voicemails. Her calendar is absolutely full and the deadlines haven't gone away. What on earth is she going to do? Aha! Rose has her aha moment, fully equipped now with the knowledge of how the prefrontal cortex uses energy through the 5 activities and the hungry things that we talked about preparing for the meeting with Emma. So now she locks her computer screen. She switches her phone off. She goes to the conveniently placed flip chart, which I put there a few minutes earlier in her office. And she writes down the tasks that she's got to do, which might include answer email, answer Teams messages, listen to voicemails, etc., etc., etc. And now she's going to start prioritizing. This is the hardest task I have today. It's task number 3. This is the next hardest task I have today. It's task number 2. Task number 5 is the next hardest after that. And you know what? At that point in the day, my brain is going to be mush. So I'm not going to do number 4 and number 1 today. I'm going to schedule or delegate. This is the difference in time management, incidentally, between things that are urgent and important. Do them right now. Important but not urgent, schedule them. Urgent but not important, delegate. And it's something that we talk about at Chris will verify, we talk about in Next Dimension literally every day. What's important and urgent, important, not urgent, urgent, not important. So now Rose gets to 5 p.m. and she's a happy bunny. She has demonstrated clear thinking. She understands what tasks take the most energy for her. And that's the bit where it might differ from person to person. She's avoided distractions through inhibiting. She's mindfully visualized and lists the tasks and activities that she has to do. She recognizes the limitations of placing too much in the prefrontal cortex, volume overload. She recognizes that she can only do what she can do. By the way, Chris and I, we talk to our teams like this all the time. When people worry about, quote, not being good enough, or I didn't get as much done as I wanted today, or I'm not happy, I need to work on this a little bit more. There is actually, in Pete's simplistic world, only one question that you ever need to ask yourself, and that would be this. If you go home tonight, look at yourself in the mirror and say, I did the best that I could do today, accepting that sometimes it's up here, sometimes it's down there, and all the other external factors that might influence me. But if I did my best, that's all I can ever ask. Part of doing your best is actually being able to assimilate this information and say, okay, what's going to take the most energy for me? How can I avoid distractions? How can I visualize and list what needs to be done? Get it down in a format that I can refer to, but I'm not trying to keep it in the head. And then understanding that if you place too much information on the prefrontal cortex, remember the Goldilocks of the brain, then you're not going to operate as efficiently as you could. She empties her mind and prioritizes. And guess what? Rose is still smiling at 5 p.m. Doesn't mean she's solved everything on that list. And she's not even attempted to. And she's recognized that some things are more important than others. Therefore, she was able to prioritize. So here's a summary. Every time the brain works on an idea consciously, it uses up a measurable and limited resource called brain energy. Some mental processes are going to use more energy than others. We've seen that. Activities like prioritizing take the most effort of all, which is why you should do them first. Prioritizing. Avoid other high mental energy activities until you've prioritized. Schedule attention-rich tasks when you are fresh. That helps you to prioritize the task list. Interact with information rather than trying to store it. And schedule blocks of time for different modes of thinking. One of the things that we do a lot at Next Dimension, Chris will know, our VP of Sales and Marketing, Andrew Ford, advocates this for everybody. I do too. You literally block off periods of time in your calendar. It's not all about meetings. It is, I am going to do this between 8 and 9. I'm going to do that between 9 and 9:30. Yes, meetings will come along, but if you can block out parts of the day, it's one of the key lessons of time management, helps keep the energy of the brain going, and therefore reduces, it increases your efficiency, reduces stress and overload, or at least that is the thinking behind all this. So that's all I've got to say on this subject today. I've tried to leave a little bit of time for discussion, for your thoughts, for your observations, what you think. But before I do that, as I said last month, I am a regular attendee of, or have been a regular attendee of the marketing peer group over the years. So this is called a teaser. This is what Jane is going to do next week, prioritizing and decision making at work. How focus requires a conscious choice about prioritizing and making decisions, and that's next week. And then we will be back in December when we will talk about multitasking and distractions and time management at work. So I'm going to open the floor up now to some conversation around the topic today, and I'm going to stop sharing. And who would like to lead us off? What's the major things that we've taken away from this session?
That we're going to be tired all the time because we just think. No, sorry, Pete. No, it was one of the, as you're going through it, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like no wonder a lot of times we are tired going through some of this. I think I know that myself, I do make lists kind of at the end of the day, and I'm going to just call it to clear my plate. It's because it's little things like I kind of go, okay, I got to remember to call Pete. I have to send Lois an email. I've got to remember to tell Ryan about such and such. And I think part of it is because I find that when I go to bed at night, if I have not done that, then I lay down and I start going, oh my gosh, I forgot to do all of these things. Now, I think one of the challenges is going through the tasks, and maybe you can speak to this, is when you kind of go, okay, this is the hardest, this is the most important. Sometimes those tasks that you still have to do that maybe are the least important, they just keep getting pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. Like, at what point do you kind of go, okay, let me just tackle them and get them done and out of the way?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to the scenario that I said about important and urgent, important, not urgent, urgent, not important. I mean, if it's urgent, not important, really, it shouldn't be on the top of your list. Yeah. If you may reclassify it over time, but if it starts off as being urgent, not important, you can delegate, you can push that back. Right. Hopefully you've got other people who can help you and assist you with that. Because the other thing that I think about is that, you know, we all fall into this trap of Chris and I know that we set quarterly targets for our employees. And the number one trap that they always fall into is they think, oh my goodness, you know, here's my quarterly target. I've got to do everything myself. We never introduced this rule that said you can't ask for assistance. So the clever ones, and there are a few of them at Next Dimension, actually realize that, you know, maybe if I set up a little group or a team, or I sought some advice from this person, this could actually make my SMART target, as we call them, easier. And people do that. But you make the assumption that, you know, it's all on you. That for a lot of people, that's the natural inclination. It's all on me. I've got to do this. I've got to do all these things. But you see, the interesting thing that I say is right, what we said right at the beginning. The modern workplace has not taken into account the limited capabilities of the human brain. Because if it had, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. It's as simple as that. And if anybody tells you, by the way, if you ever go into an interview where you're hiring somebody and the candidate and you say to the candidate, give me, you know, a great example of multitasking. Don't believe a word of it. Nobody can multitask. The honest answer is, I actually prioritize my list of things to do because I've realized that I can't multitask because it depletes energy from the prefrontal cortex. And then you go, wow, did you go to Pete's peer group?
Pete, maybe here's a question. How do you empower your team knowing that, okay, you're, everybody's tasked with a lot of things. And I think you just kind of mentioned that you and Chris kind of do this with your team. How do you go about talking to your team and getting them to realize they don't have to panic all the time? How to prioritize, get them to understand, okay, this is important, and kind of go through some of those things?
Well, the one thing that I try and do, and Chris is going to smile in a minute, because I take a leaf straight out of the Harry Potter book. You know what they say Dumbledore says to Harry Potter? Help will always be given at Hogwarts to those that ask. And I say exactly the same. Chris will tell you, anybody who works at Next Dimension, help will always be given to those who ask. Now, for a lot of people, that means I've failed. If I'm having to ask for help or assistance, I have failed. Not true. It's actually a strength to recognize, woo, I can't do this on my own. And sometimes coming to Chris or coming to Pete is the best thing of all, because we'll either say, don't worry about it, have a couple more days, or why don't you go and speak to so-and-so? He just did something similar. He might be able to help you more than us. It's that sense of we're there. You're not in standalone mode. I think that's really important, that you let people know that it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, I think that's the most difficult to part, Pete, is just to admit that you do need help, but it's not a sign of weakness. It's it's definitely viewed the opposite. It's just hard to wrap your brain around that sometimes. But yeah, you're right.
Heather, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I want to echo what Pete just said about asking for help, but I also would like to, for me, with my direct reports, I think it's always important for them just to communicate to me their plan. And it doesn't have to be that it gets done today. If they give themselves enough time, that's all I need to know is what their plan is. And it just really resonates with me. We had a situation, and Chantel, I'm going to share this with the group, because Chantel and I had her one-on-one this morning, and she was saying that, she was in meetings all morning, and then she's going to work on this thing this afternoon. And I said to her, are you really going to be able to get to that this afternoon? And she said, realistically, probably not. So she reprioritized it to align with what her reality was in the course of the day, which as soon as she got out of her meetings, her direct reports are probably going to ask her a bunch of questions, and she's going to sidetrack. So she was able to set a realistic priority so that we're working now towards that, and I can manage the rest of the business or the upwards as well. So, but you're absolutely right. Asking for help and setting realistic priorities, I think, is the key to managing the tasks at hand.
Very cool. Very cool.
I would say that's great too, because in a lot of situations, and you just brought up an interesting point, is that all of a sudden she realizes that some of her priorities are going to shift because she thinks, okay, I'm going to tackle this. But then you apart from kind of locking yourself in your office and saying nobody enter, you have other people that come in to ask them those questions. So it shifts your priority. So you realize, okay, I'm going to set aside time. Pete?
Yeah, I do want to mention one thing. The culture of your organization is a huge factor in this. I couldn't help noticing that when we were going through scenario B and Rose switched off her laptop, or she put it in lock mode and then switched off her phone, there was gasps of horror from the audience.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say anything in your employment contract that you can't switch your phone off and concentrate. It doesn't say anything in your employment contract that you can't lock your screen. Why not?
One of the things I talk with my clients about is, it's the do not disturb. There are times when you need to put up the do not disturb. Just tell people this, I need a half an hour, I need an hour, whatever. So, if someone died or the building is burning down, yes, then you can disturb me. But otherwise, at 2:30, I will be free again to answer any questions, whatever. People they just like, oh, they respect that. And then they start to say, oh, can I do that too? Can I put up a do not disturb sign? And then it kind of flows and everyone has, some of that dedicated work time and planning that to the energy things, understanding when are you good at different kinds of work, because different kinds of work, creative work versus working in an Excel spreadsheet, you're going to be good at those at different times of the day, depending on your natural cycles and rhythms. And so just understanding building some of that understanding, and don't be afraid to, do not disturb.
On our service desk, we have 3 levels of technicians. We have a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3. And our tier 3s are the ones that are involved in the most complex problems and require a lot of focus and attention. And Chris and I have been trying very hard over the last little while, probably meaning about the last 6 months now, think about it, to actually stop the tier 1s and the tier 2s from wandering over to the tier 3s and just asking them questions, because that is a distraction. And when you're in the zone, let's call it, and you're trying to solve a really complex problem, if you can't inhibit the distraction, which you can't if somebody just comes up and stands next to your desk, then you're going to lose energy. And I think it was proven somewhere, I read, that it takes you 25 minutes to get back in the zone.
Yep. And that's a lot of time when you're trying to solve a complex problem, right? I mean, that's a huge percentage of the total time on the problem. If that's happening multiple times during the day, it quickly adds up to an hour, 2 hours that you're losing.
Losing.
Yeah, I know personally, sometimes when you get on a roll with something, I don't want to be disturbed, because that thought process, I'm good to go, and everything kind of comes out, the creativity, whatever, the ideas come out. But if I stop, then I totally forget. Pete, one of the things you talked about was, when Rose went into the room to meet Emma, and it's that whole thought of, why did I come in here? Like, I know sometimes I go in the basement to go get a bag of milk and I think, oh, what am I doing? Why did I come down here? And I go all the way back upstairs and can't remember. I'm sure other people can relate, or at least I'm hoping people can.
Yes, we do, Kelly. We do.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's once you get into something, and if you have too many things on the go, it makes it a little hard. And funny, my niece is in her first year of university. She's trying to understand the whole complexity of studying and being in her room and trying to, have a life and whatever else. And a couple of these things were something she met with somebody to help her prioritize and get herself organized. And one of the things was me time. One of the things was just kind of set aside time and go, okay, here's my blocks of an hour I'm going to study. And then, and she even said, hey, you know what? It's just like go for a walk or go grab a coffee or whatever. And a suggestion, oddly enough, was just put in a jar things to do, things like grab a coffee, go for a walk, do a stretch, because sometimes that's thinking, okay, I need to take a break, but what am I going to do? And you pull it out of the hat.
Minimizing decisions throughout the day, so to make as few decisions as possible. That I've heard, like, Barack Obama is like, he's like, this is the Monday suit, the Tuesday suit, because he was making some pretty big decisions, and he knew it would take energy if he had to decide what suit and tie and shirt am I going to wear today. It had to be, because so he didn't have to think about it. It's just bang, bang, bang. So anything that you can simplify. And another thing is, it's likening it to having too many tabs open on your web browser. You can't have very many tabs open in your brain. You've got to close down the extra tabs, because you can only really have one open at a time. Trying to keep multiple tabs open in your brain, not going to work.
Sam, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're all talking about work and things like that. And I think Kelly brought a good point. We have too many things going. She uses notes. I do use notes. Is that a good idea? I mean, I write a lot of things. Pick up the thing, hand over, talk to so, make an appointment. These are not sort of work priorities predominantly, or some of them are. But is that a good idea, or is that a bad habit?
To take notes?
Just write notes. Like, I have a pile of little stickies that I keep and I cross them and then I have them like almost a Rolodex.
Well, it sounds to me like that's the Sam way of prioritizing, which if it works for you is perfect.
Mhm.
I mean, on the point of asking for assistance, I do feel that related to this is, again, the cultural aspect of making it okay for anybody who works for you to make mistakes. You know, Chris has heard this a gazillion times. Somebody will come to us in a meeting and say, I screwed up, I did this, I did that. And my first question is, well, did anyone die? Well, no, nobody died. Okay, is it the end of civilization as we know it? Well, no. Is Next Dimension going to go bankrupt as a result of the mistake you just made? Well, no. Have you learnt anything from this? Absolutely. Next time, thanks. That's enough for me. That's it. No point in making a big deal out of a mistake. Help them.
Making notes is always good because, you know, and then when you get it done, you can throw it in the garbage. You know, like, you can clearing off that note. That's what I do. I make notes, and I love to throw it in the garbage when it's done.
It releases endorphins in the brain, which is a feel-good chemical, right?
Yeah, I do the same. It's like the big scratch. It's not even just going, okay, a line through. It's like, yeah, it's done. And it does make you feel better because you feel like you've accomplished something.
Yeah, by the end of the week, you have a list to show where your time went. And often we have to provide summaries of our weeks and everything, and it's already handily written out for us. So yeah, the lists are great.
And those lists are also really helpful to periodically look at and say, am I spending my time on the most important tasks and priorities?
Mm-hmm.
Because look at what you've crossed off and what you have not crossed off. And it's like, oh, were those the right things? Maybe, maybe not.
Good point.
And then you can take that forward in your further planning.
Either that, or you can see what you keep putting off.
And
is that something you could delegate? Is that something that you really have to do? Is it something that could go in your garbage bin?
Yeah. Because sometimes you put it off because when it comes right down to it, you really shouldn't be doing it.